If you're a parent in a 2-income household and you're considering sending your child to full-time daycare, I would like to give you a few things to consider. I worked in a daycare facility, and I would like to share with you a few things that happened when I was there as well. I'm not against sending kids to a Christian-based preschool a couple of mornings a week, maybe starting at 9 or 10 a.m. and going till about lunchtime or something like that. Especially if you have a child who is by themselves, they don't have any other siblings at home, maybe other siblings are at school or whatever it may be. And I think that's fine. They can learn how to be social and that kind of thing. That's no problem. But let me explain to you why I think it is not good to send your child to full-time daycare. Number one, they need you. Developmentally, your child needs you. They need the only person in the world that cares about them more than any other person in the world, and that's you. There is no other person in the world who will truly care about them the way that their parent does. The next best thing would be a grandparent. So if you're the sole provider for your household, do whatever you can to find a relative that you can have take care of your child instead of sending them to daycare. Number two, teaching and training. If you want to be the most effective parent you can be, teaching and training consistently is what will do it. A child who goes from one setting to another and one caretaker to another, which does happen in daycare situations, cannot possibly have the same consistency in their teaching and training as a child who's at home with their parent. That consistent teaching and training is what makes a child secure, happy, and content. This is why, according to research done in a study of early child care by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, found that more time being spent in daycares increases the likelihood that a child is going to have behavior problems, such as aggressive behaviors. You can find the source for that study in the description below. Now, I'm not really big on studies. I don't necessarily always believe them, but this one makes sense. It's logical sense that a child would not develop in the same way as they would if they're at home with their parent. Number three, less quality time. If your child is in full-time daycare Monday through Friday, early morning till dinner time, most of their waking hours are going to be with someone else. And we're talking about their formative years, when they're learning about the world and how to navigate it and what to think. Who's really raising the child if they are with someone else the whole day? And even at the end of that day, if you're sending them to daycare because you're working full-time, you're also going to be exhausted at the end of the day, and you won't have the energy and you won't be able to be the most effective parent you can be because you're going to be worn out. So it's really not the best thing for your child, but it's also not the best thing for you. Number four, you will miss milestones. One of the big joys of parenting is to see your child reach those milestones as they're growing and developing. If they're in daycare full-time, it's likely that you're going to miss their first smile, their first laugh, their first crawl, their first steps, their first words, whatever it may be. You're probably going to miss those things because they're going to be in the care of someone else most of the day. These are things that parents rejoice in. Don't let that happen. Number five, cost. A few years ago, I listened to a book that showed how a second income usually is not going to be actually adding to the money that is taken in by the household if it includes also sending a child to childcare. Once you factor in the childcare cost itself, and you factor in the transportation to and from the job, and the extra meals that you eat out because of that, and all the other factors, when you factor all of that in, usually the second income is not actually adding to the budget of the family. Now, I can't remember the name of that book, so if any of you are listening to this and you know what the name of that book is, I would love it if you would put it in the comments below. But I do want to suggest that if you are a family and you have a second income and you're trying to decide whether or not to send a child to daycare, sit down, calculate out all of the child care costs, the transportation, the meals, and all the other stuff that it's going to take, and how much that second income is actually bringing in. Is it worth it to send your child away during those formative years for that amount of money? Sometimes people are even losing money and they don't even realize it. Take the time to calculate that out before you make a decision. Number six, risk of abuse. I wanted to tell you about my experience when I worked in a daycare center when I was right out of college. I turned in my resume for the job and I was hired right away. When I was working there, I noticed one of the other workers would show favoritism toward one or two children, and she would be harsh and ignore and kind of almost neglect the other children that were in her care. It was really obvious who was favored and who wasn't. This really bothered me, so I brought it to the attention of the owner. She said she would talk to her, but I didn't see any change happen after that. Even though I never witnessed actual physical abuse, I certainly would say there were children that were neglected and ignored, and they were not having their emotional needs met in any way during the day by that care worker. She actually treated them more like they were an annoyance than that they were the precious young people that they were. So that made me curious. Why did they hire me, and how did they choose what workers they get for this daycare? After all, I didn't have any experience in a daycare before I was hired there, and so it made me wonder. So when I asked, I was told I was hired because I was there. I looked like a responsible person. And so they gave me charge of a whole group of young children without any experience in doing that at all. I could have not cared about children at all and been hired, and clearly this other woman only cared about certain children and not so much about others. Basically, they just needed bodies to fill the job. No matter where you send your child for the day, the risk of abuse is real, especially in facilities where the children who are there are so young they don't have any way to express when they're being abused or neglected. We have all seen those undercover videos of daycare workers being abusive to young children. This happens every day, and it could happen to your child. This is another really good reason not to send your children to full-time daycare unless it's absolutely necessary. Number 7, the time is short. You have probably heard the phrase, children grow up so fast, or time flies. I've had 9 children, and I'm telling you, that is true. You look back on it and you think, wow, those years of my children growing up went by so fast. Most of your adult life, you will not have little children. This time is short, and it will go by very quickly. Don't miss it to work in a job that won't miss you when you're gone. Spend that time instead with your children. You will never regret taking a few years away from a job to raise your children, but you will regret it if you don't. If you watched this video to the end, I hope that you will subscribe and click on one of the cards on the screen now to find more step-by-step videos to become the most effective parent you can be. Parents, if you're struggling, something needs to change, and you can do this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.